Thank you. Right, now we move on to item 12, changes to the urban rating area and rating of farm and lifestyle properties within the urban rating area, and bring to the table Andrew Duncan, Beth and Aaron.
Sorry.
Apology accepted.
Good afternoon. This paper proposes changes to our urban rating area so that properties that now have access to urban levels of services will be paying the same rates as their neighbours. It's about a 11% increase in rates for the 7,500 properties covered. This doesn't include Warkworth. It includes areas that have developed on the boundary of Auckland, and also includes some of these smaller townships. There is the choice for you to decide not to consult on including Kumu Huapai Riverhead within the boundary, or to wait until you've received the feedback from the public before making a final decision on that. This paper also recommends that farm and lifestyle properties within the urban rating area pay residential rates or business rates depending on how they're zoned. These properties have the same level of council services provided to them as others, and would give them a small incentive to develop their land for how it's zoned. Their rates would go from 80% of the urban residential rate for those that can be developed as urban properties to the full rates. That's about a 25% increase. There's about 500 properties that will be affected and another 115 that will be added when we extend the urban rating area. There's substantial detail attached to the report setting out the basis for the analysis of service areas. We're happy to take any questions.
Again, we've covered this, but if anyone's got any questions or comments. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, I've got some questions on the applicability of this proposal to Herald Island and Whenuapai, and conceivably Hobsonville, leave Hobsonville to last. When I read the little intro point 24, the levels and types of services between rural and urban provision include roading, footpaths, public transport, community facilities, parks, stormwater services, etc. And I look at what's available at Whenuapai and Herald Island, where there's no paths, there's no sports fields, and interestingly enough, the catchment's based on a 15-minute drive. I'm not quite sure how 14 or sub 18-year-old kids drive to have a kick round on a sports park that doesn't exist. So question number one, has this been a desktop exercise, or have people actually been out to these settlements?
Yeah, it's been based on the assets that we have recorded in
Yeah. Okay, so if this is all about drawing comparability between council facilities that are available to rural as opposed to urban people, then that doesn't really mesh up with what's available in Whenuapai and Herald Island. I mean, Whenuapai, they built their own hall, so it's their hall that they built. The major issue out there is sewage and stormwater from the septic tanks getting onto the berms. That's about the level of service that's provided for them. So am I to take the fact that we're expecting to get in a car and drive with their children to these places 15 or 20 minutes away to access a pool in Glenfield, for instance, which is the one that's referenced there, which you'd be lucky if you could do it in 20 minutes. So I just, they're under this this rural residential current rates differential, which, whatever the descriptors are for that, to me will be appropriate because of the level of lack of council facilities that are available there. I mean, it talks about this the arts and culture venue, old post office museum on Herald Island.
Yeah.
That's maintained by a couple of people from the local ratepayers association, volunteers. They've done. So the sort of facilities, if we're talking about even a sports park, I mean, that's pretty basic to most. If I think of most urban areas, a sports park is available within a set distance. These guys have to get in their car and drive to Hobsonville Domain, which is currently just serving the whole of Hobsonville and the emerging Scott Point. So I don't see any mesh between what's available on Herald Island in the Whenuapai catchment, other than a quite a lengthy drive, and that doesn't mesh with my view of urban as it goes to any place on the North Shore, the Hibiscus Coast, Manukau, anywhere. It's quite different.
Right. There is a domain in the middle of Herald Island, and there is some reserve land at the end of Herald Island.
It's not a sports park.
It's not a sports park, but not everyone has a sports park within 15 minutes walk. So the standard for sports parks was a 15-minute drive, and which is similar to other parts of the northwest.
Yeah, so it's not 50. We're talking about getting people out of cars, so it's a drive everywhere. And I understand there's been a changes to the bus service on Herald Island too recently.
So the 15-minute drive for sports parks and libraries, etc., is listed in Best Analysis as the standard for urban Auckland. So that's the other areas.
Comparison point that I've used for all of the rest of urban Auckland. Noting that most people do drive to sports fields because they'll be competing against different teams.
Yeah, if you go to the communities in Herald Island and Whenuapai, and you tell them that you're getting an 8%, 8 plus 5, a 13, nearly 15% increase in your rates because you've got all those council services available to you, they're going to laugh you out of the door because they're just not there. We know because we go out there each week. As I said, the biggest issue is sewage and stormwater leaking from their septic tanks not through the pavements, because there is no pavements, onto other properties. So that doesn't sound like urban Auckland to me.
So I think what I will say is that this is staff advice to go out for consultation. What you're saying is some local feedback, and I get that. I think you'll find that and I'm not doubting your input, but this is the time to actually make that decision is when the feedback comes back.
Also, the wastewater services aren't included in this analysis.
Stormwater are.
What is this? Yeah.
So I won't be supporting it going out to consultation because there's going to be an uproar in these particular communities here. Can I just ask, I said I'd ask about Hobsonville, which, and I look at the map, which part of Hobsonville is that referring to? It looks like it's Scott Point, and then the other bit on the other side of the motorway, it's obviously not the built-up part of Hobsonville.
Yeah, so it's all the parts. It's all the parts that are outside where the MUL was, which was the motorway through to the end, and that comes in, and it's Scott's Point, and plus the stuff north of the motorway.
Okay. So, and all of Scott's Point that's currently undergoing development. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes sense there. That's an urban environment. Whenuapai and Herald Island aren't.
Thanks, John. I think you've made that point. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I just want to follow on from my fellow Albany Ward Councillor, John Watson, and I put the question to you that if I apply the three tests, have the same access to council services as their urban rated neighbours. Secondly, have access to much higher levels of council services than farm and lifestyle properties in rural areas. And lastly, most of these properties have a residential use and place similar demands on council services to other residential properties. When I assess Herald Island and Whenuapai, first of all around public transport, the public transport is abysmal. If you were a disabled person and you had to walk to the bus, frankly, give it away. You could be written off. There aren't any footpaths. In fact, sometimes you have to walk through, in winter, areas where you've got sewage flowing over the footpath, because that's how bad the drainage network and the, in this instance, absence of any wastewater is. You referenced the hall. That hall is maintained by the community, and they got to run cake stalls and the like to maintain it. Right now, they've got difficulties in how they are going to maintain it. So it ain't as though it's a council facility. And the cultural facility that you refer to, I mean, it's a lovely little museum, but frankly, you'd be lucky to get in there because sometimes the volunteers are sick. They have been lately, and it was pretty much shut down with COVID. So it ain't anything to write home about. Certainly, I don't think it rates with cultural facilities that we provide. So if I apply those tests, it just doesn't stack up. They are, yes, getting something from the water targeted rate to hopefully address some of their sewage issues, but that's quite separate. So frankly, Madam Chair, we're buying in for a fight here, and I would have thought that if it doesn't meet the test now, that we wouldn't go out because we're going to get an uproar. And frankly, if it went to judicial review, I can't see how it would stack up. But of course, these people, frankly, they're not that well off, and I doubt whether they could afford that anyway, and I wouldn't want to impose it on them. So I've got real concerns. Yes, there is some water around that might serve as a pool, but you can't get to it because you've got to wade through sediment and mud flats and delightful mangroves to get there. So as far as the pool's concerned, it doesn't rate that test either. And I'm sure in terms of other facilities, and I'm looking at my friend over there, Mr. Divery, there ain't any marae. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I think as far as anything along those lines are concerned, it also falls out. So that's a question.
Councillor,
does it stack up?
Councillor, I have a point of order, sorry.
I just think the kind of laughing at the staff's report is inappropriate, and it breaches one of our standing orders. I think it's section 7.1. We're not supposed to be disparaging anything.
It is Christmas, Madam Chair.
So you get a free ride to be rude to people?
No, I'm not trying to be rude. Go and check the post office and the museum and so on out.
So I'll just hold that. I'm going to rule that we'll just stop that conversation, Councillor, thank you, and I'll hand to our CFO to make a comment.
Oops, sort of died. It's really just to draw back to the nature of the conversation we're having here. And as you know, rates are never absolute. We're making assessments, and on the basis you're having the rural, you have the urban areas, you're using relative comparative measures as to how the level of services they're getting. And it's not within the immediate facility. You've heard the conversation about the 15-minute drive to access those facilities. That's what this is about. So this is seeking your guidance. We've got a proposal put in front of you today, which is identifying areas we believe are delivering not the same degree, absolute, but when you look at the measures put in place here, they are receiving a similar level of service to other areas, and the guidance we're seeking today is whether you believe the areas identified should be going out for consultation. But I'll just remind you, it is not an absolute guidance it's not a binary arrangement. You've either got the service completely or you haven't got it. There's some guidance and measures in place here to give a feel as to the level of service you are getting. And the conversation today is about whether some of the areas we have now should actually be falling into the closer to the urban level of service compared to what they were previously. That's all it's about.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Good afternoon. Hengaya Drury, you've indicated percentage rating. I'm just looking at page 320 at attachment A. 100% pools, 100% leisure centre, 100% arts and culture venue, 68% regional library, 0% community centre, 100% bookable venues. Do these areas, I don't believe these areas have footpaths. Do the areas have stormwater? Do the areas have curb and channeling? Do the areas have streetlights?
So around Papakura they do, and the areas that are developing now do. So as the area develops, more of these facilities will come in.
No, I'm talking about the areas that are currently not developed and not necessarily consented to be developed. They'd have to be developed in the future and paid for by the property owners as they apply for the consent to develop. But at the moment, the areas that are within this particular footprint that would be rated, they don't have that infrastructure, do they?
Yeah, so they will be paying lower rates because their land hasn't developed yet, and they'll be the same as any other part of undeveloped land that's within the urban rating area currently.
And the reason why they can't develop in the Hengai area is because the council doesn't actually have the latent capacity within the water network to supply water to the property. Is that correct?
If they're zoned, they will be. So it's based on zoning. So again, it's not absolute. So it's the areas that are zoned to be developed. It excludes those areas that are future urban zoned.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry, respectfully, within this area,
Yeah.
there is an area that has been live zoned
Yes.
that can't be developed to reflect the zoning because the latent capacity doesn't exist to supply water to enable the development in the first place.
There are
isn't the
parts
inf-
of
there is no infrastructure here.
yeah, and there's no infrastructure in other areas that haven't developed yet. It'll come as development occurs. There are areas within Auckland that have been zoned to a much higher level than they can sustain based on the current infrastructure. It's an issue across Auckland. We are talking about a general line to define whether these areas should be inside or outside the urban rating area.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with the community about this, but I think that we're going to have difficulty persuading the communities affected that actually they're getting the infrastructure and the permission and the capacity to achieve the urbanisation that is being mooted here, Chair. But that will be my comment. Happy to go on and have a conversation with the community in Hengai, but that will not be an easy conversation to have given that the council has not delivered the infrastructure and the council currently has no mechanism to deliver it. You know, you can't put water into that part of the peninsula. There is no capacity, there is no supply, there is no infrastructure to accommodate it. And if there were, the community itself would have to pay for it, not through the rate, but through the contributions that they would make when they apply for the consent.
Look, I see where this is going. Unfortunately, I mean, you did, Daniel, but I don't think anybody else, to my best of my memory, brought it up in the workshop for staff to change and develop. So one of the great things about going out for consultation is that if you get issues that people don't like, they often have a better engagement around that. So this is something that I'm sure the councillors in the relevant areas will be encouraging their people to feedback on. Councillor Cooper.
It's probably not worth saying. I think it was more of a comment. But maybe the question is, because I live and I cycle around Whenuapai, I live in West Harbour, more developed. When I'm looking at it, I'm actually further away from Fred Taylor Park if I want to go and play football than Whenuapai or Herald Island. Do you assess what other more urbanised areas are that, and also for football, rugby, still cyclable? Do you assess and look at the areas close by to see, you know, things, because there's bus routes for both areas. Do you look, is that what you look at? You go, okay, can they get to these amenities? It might, because I mean, it's not in my area either. I'd have to do I think it's a 7 or 8k drive, the same as or less than Herald Island to get to some of these places. So is that what you look at?
So the current urban rating area, as I said, is based on the MUL, which may or may not relate to our current service levels. The proposed extension, I've used the catchments that have been created through the asset management plans and just checked to see what percentage of properties fell within that 15-minute drive catchment, and I've manually checked some. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. I think where this is going is really a question of definitions. That's what we're actually debating in this debate. And sorry if this is a silly question, but definition around the urban level of service. The purpose of nailing this down, right, because the public might ask us about this. Forgive me, what is the status of Piha and Te Henga? Are they within or without?
They're out.
They're out, so they're rural?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, that's cool. That helps with the definitions. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. In the workshop, I did raise about Huapai and Kimyu, and I think Andrew and the team might have had that argument prepared, just what we would actually say to the public around why we'd be including probably Kimyu and Huapai. Maybe you might like to touch on Riverhead as well. Just, yeah, that'd be great. So, and then following that, Andrew, I might just ask if the Rodney Local Board's feedback on it in terms of supporting this going forward or not. Is that, I can't just find it in the report, that was all.
No, we haven't directly engaged with the Rodney Local Board on this yet, because the Kumu, Huapai and Riverhead, as you would have recalled from the presentation at the workshop, got higher levels of service from the analysis that Beth's done than the rural areas, but not quite yet at the level of the urban areas. So there's a question as to where do they sit. Consultation on this, if you were to include them in the consultation, it will allow you to give some more thought to that, building on the feedback you received from the community. So,
Madam Chair, I'd probably have the argument then that it might be a bit early to be putting it in. If it's sitting on that cusp, you know, this can be a difficult sell into the community.
I think the time to have it is when the community, have the discussion with the community and then have it back here. Yeah.
I just disagree with that, Madam Chair, respectively.
Fair enough. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair, for the second effort. Regarding local board views, I think that's a good point. Have we consulted the Henderson Massey Local Board, and why not, if we haven't?
so the timeframes precluded this, and the local boards were, I understand, were involved in the workshops where we spoke about this.
Chairs were.
Sorry,
Yeah. Remember that it wasn't no full local board, it's just the chairs being representative. Councillor Walker.
Just a similar question around any feedback or engagement with the Upper Harbour Local Board.
Again, I think the answer to that is that the chairs were invited to the session, but the staff have said that they haven't directly gone to those local boards.
Just through you, Madam Chair, I mean, in a situation where, if we take the example of Whenuapai and Herald Island, this change is a matter of quite some significance to that local board area, perhaps as compared to other local boards. It would be good practice to actively bring it to their attention and engage with them. I just make that suggestion.
I think that's a good point. I take that on board. Thank you for that. Look, I've got no amendments, so I'm going to look for a mover.
I'm going to make an amendment, Madam Chair. I was just sketching it out now, just to remove Huapai and Kimyu. I'd like to put that forward.
and Riverhead?
Yeah, and Riverhead. Thanks, Andrew. Just on the advice that you've given. So is that all right, Madam Chair, if I just brought it up, or maybe
Yeah,
got some help to
Just give me,
to
can
word
we
it?
just take two minutes, please, so we just get the people to type that up.
Consider also excluding Whenuapai and Herald Island.
Let's just get a process here. If you've got a councillor putting up an amendment, do you have a seconder, Greg?
So I'll get it on the board first.
Okay.
So people can have a look.
Madam Chair, I'm very concerned if we're going to start dialling this back by slice. I'd rather see the work be done and actually there's more work probably Beth's done an initial, obviously, test on what should be in and what should be out. The margin of error is going to be on the cusp here. So we're going to have to decide, I think, what is the level of service that classifies a property as urban rather than rural. And that's sort of spelled out partially in the papers here, but I think there's a bit more refinement work to be done here. And there are some areas that do get services that are currently getting rating advantaged. I think they should be paying urban rates. But it's on the cusp where we're going to have the fun and games. The areas that have got partial service, they might have articulated water, but no sewage treatment or little PT or something like that. So there's obviously some more work to be done. I think it's a good start. It's on the fringe. I think we should just proceed with what we've got and tidy it up as we work our way through over the next 6 months.
Okay, so but by process, I have an amendment, so I'm just going to. Your Worship, do you want to move and the Deputy Mayor to second the original motion first? Yep.
Second? Yeah.
Okay, can we have the screen up, please? Order, please. Can I have you back? Sorry about that. Councillor Cooper. So, Councillor Sayers, who's the seconder of your amendment, please? There we go. Councillor Walker.
Okay, thank you. And
Do you want to speak to that?
I do want to just thank the officers to help with that wording of the amendment there as well. Thank you for that.
Do you want to speak to your amendment?
Yes, I'm happy to. I think it's just what I've just heard. We brought it up in the workshop and the question was raised, should it be in or out? The officers had a chance to go away in the meantime, come back today and give them a report that we can make that decision. However, the wording was, it's not word for word, I'm sorry, Andrew, but it was like, they haven't got all the services yet, but they're coming. So my argument is it's just a little bit soon to go out to try and take that to that community right now. Certainly it's going to be appropriate in the future, and I would support that in the future, but now it doesn't seem to be the right time, Madam Chair. So that's the justification behind it.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else supporting the amendment who wants to speak? Councillor Hills.
Madam Chair, I guess I have a question, and I just worry that we could, and maybe it's not an issue, but could get ourselves into legal trouble if we are moving things in and out outside of policy, especially if other properties or areas are within or have had these changes in the past or need to. So I'm not clear what supporting this or opposing this puts us in.
Thank you, Councillor. Andrew.
So the question, in the advice that was prepared, we identified Warkworth as not having the same level of service. We identified the other areas as having the same or very close to the urban levels of service, and we identified Kumeu Huapai and Riverhead as being more service than rural, but not yet as much as urban, and that they fell in the middle. And so I think there's information in our advice that supports you making, as a council, a choice as to where you would put these for consultation.
And just as a note that those areas listed there, Warkworth, Kimu, Huapai and Riverhead are all separately identified with the RUB boundary, so there's an area of rural land between them and the current urban rating area, whereas the other areas, it's future urban zone that they're sort of contiguous to the rest of the RUB. If that makes sense. So there's the potential for those areas around Whanuapai to develop over time and join up as a contiguous, whereas these areas listed here, you'd actually need to redefine the rural urban boundary through the entry plan before that could happen.
So what, can I just translate that? So staff are sticking by their advice, but it is a political decision, and I suppose the decision we make here is, do we make a call before we go out to consultation or not? That is really the basis of the amendment, I suppose. Councillor Filipaina.
The only question I have is to our staff is, what, if any, are the repercussions that we now include Kumu, Huapai and Riverhead into this recommendation if the amendment goes through?
They're excluded.
I know they're excluded,
sorry, you said that.
but I mean, what other implications? I know that we're putting in there and it's going out for consultation, but I mean, do we open up ourselves to then more areas being put in to exclude? If this goes through, that's where I'm looking. I just needed some advice.
No, these are the only ones where our advice was identifying them as falling partway between the Warkworth situation and the urban situation, in particular because of the contiguity point that Beth made. So there isn't an implication from doing this.
Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks. Just a question. So if these were included, I'm not sure how much we can do in terms of quick maths, but how many properties would be left if those were excluded in the proposal?
It drops to from 7,500 for all the properties, and then dropping down to 4,000 if we exclude Kimu Huapai. So there's about 3,000 properties in Kimu Huapai and Riverhead.
Okay, so sorry, that was about 4,000 left, right?
Yep.
How many of those would be in the northwest?
I have to go to my northwest. So on one of these ones. Look how we've got the numbers.
Sorry for asking you to do this.
Looking here.
That's quite difficult, I know.
So Henderson Massey, we've got 300, and yeah.
No, but I mean the northwest
And
total, because I've got a...
Upper Harbour has got 2,300, which will.
Okay.
Yeah.
So over the northwest catchment, would it be fair to say that collectively that would be the significant population that would be left
Yep.
to be affected?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Cooper.
So, just want to go back a bit. So, a lot of this area was declared urban basically by the SHAs, special housing areas that we did a couple of terms ago. So, I mean, I was just wondering if the horse is bolted really in terms of it. It's not so much rural anymore, is it? That's what I'm.
And
That's what you're saying, basically saying to us. This is
Yes. Yeah.
It's massive subdivisions developed under the special housing area legislation, which we approved.
That's correct. So any other questions or comments on the amendment? Councillor Walker.
Clarification, are there any SHAs in Whanuapai, Herald Island? Don't think so.
SHAs have gone, extinguished.
We don't have them anymore.
Okay, so is it appropriate to make a comment, Madam Chair?
Absolutely.
So my personal view, and I'm sure it's shared by Councillor Watson, would be to include Whanuapai and Herald Island in the exclusions. I would suggest that there will be an overwhelming flood of submissions otherwise, which is simply going to occupy a great deal of officer time, and will end up making, I would hope, the appropriate decision at the time, which is that there isn't a case for these areas to be paying a high rate because of the absence of so many critical services. Anyway, that's my position. There may not be support to add Whenuapai and Herald Island to that list, but there we are.
Okay, so we have an amendment and we need to take it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. I'm ruling that the no's won. So we go back to the original motion, which is moved by the Mayor and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against?
Sorry, we haven't had a chance to speak, so you just moved the amendment. I want to speak to the substantive.
All right, fixes, but sorry, you can go there. Yep.
You know, I've got some concerns with this process. Admittedly, I perhaps should have picked up a few of these things earlier, but it came relatively late in the piece. If this is to go out and consult in good faith, which it's meant to be, it shouldn't be using the consultation process to work things out. We should be pretty sure of our position going out, and that position should have validity to it. Now, what I've tried to assert today in a reasonably detailed fashion is that the sense of urban amenity as it applies to the balance of Auckland does not occur in Whenuapai, and it does not occur in Herald Island. There's not even footpaths over most of it. The last time I was out there, the big complaint was that no one could cycle or walk on the side of the road because it was so dangerous along Cowrie Road and most other roads throughout Whenuapai. That was what was exercising the public. Can you imagine what the response is going to be now when you go out to these 1,200 households, a number of whom aren't particularly affluent, and say, oh guys, we're going to bung up your rates by 8% plus the 5 or 6 that's in the proposal because you enjoy all this urban amenity in terms of footpaths, stormwater systems, community facilities, etc., etc. They do not exist. They're actually isolated pockets from the urban fringe of Westgate and Hobsonville. You know, these are distinct communities in themselves. So, as Councillor Walker said, we're going to create a degree of angst and uproar in areas where there's always a degree of resentment because of the lack of facilities that they enjoy, and basic facilities like stopping sewage going onto your berm. So, to me, this is not the way to proceed with this, and we should have stepped back. I know the officers have had a lot of work to do. I mean, I welcome the choice to actually go out there and walk around with them and to point out the points that I've tried to make today. So deciding this by a big public consultation process is not the way to go. The local board, they may not have picked this up at all. If the chair didn't ring in, there's no way they necessarily would have picked up the detail here. So this isn't good process. This is going to cause a lot of backlash in these particular areas, which we're going to have to front, knowing what the background is anyway. And when it comes to it, no one listens to the ward councillors. You know, what do they know about things? Let's just quickly tick the box and get on to the next thing. So, you know, I'm not very pleased with that, and I'll be registering my vote against it.
So, Councillor, I take that and I get your concern, and I think the trouble is the time between the workshop and now, what staff have been asked to do is in the workshop and then being faced with today. I think the key here is to ensure that in the consultation document that there is a special section around this for these communities. There's obviously some feeling of concern, and I really appreciate that, and I think that should be noted. So I think there needs to be a reasonable amount of time in the consultation document for that to be explained. All right? It's not a tick box exercise. It's not something that we should take over lightly. It's something that I think if staff have that justification that they should spend some time on, and we'll all be able to sign that off before it gets delivered any further. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. And just briefly, I will be supporting this motion, but I just wanted to add my voice to Councillor Watson in that he makes a great point around the levels of service in some of these communities. And I think it behoves us as a council to actually invest in them. When we're looking at growth, we need to invest in that growth. I'm looking at this table here. Most of these places don't have a pool. Northwest, Riverhead, Kumeu, Huapai. I bring this up all the time around here. We need a pool for the Northwest, bottom line. And then we can say for sure these places are urban. So I will be voting for this. I'll be voting for it to go to consultation, and I support it 100%. But I think that there is a question here around investing in our communities where we take growth.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Chair, one of the things that, one of the things that I am unsure of in the consultation, because it seems that the premise here is that you're getting urban amenity or the benefits of being, urban services, and we would like to see urban development in this location. What do I actually go and say to these constituents who want to develop, but they can't develop? Why? Because the council hasn't actually put in the infrastructure, the water infrastructure. There's no water here for communities affected within the peninsula of Hengaia. There will be water one day. We've had a big debate about getting the headworks in there to get water to the boundary. We don't even have an agreement between Watercare and Veolia around service provision. There is no agreement to get a transaction underway, to get the infrastructure in place to accommodate the development that the people would like but can't enable because of what the council hasn't got. So it is an issue of timing, and I don't know what we will say in the consultation with those landowners there when we say, well, actually we're going to rate you for urban even though we're not actually going to be able to supply for water yet. Does anybody have an answer? I suspect the answer is we don't have an answer, because actually that's the other part of the equation that hasn't been done. This is not about people getting a freebie. This is about some of these property owners being incredibly frustrated because they've come to the party to try and enable development of their land pursuant to the council live zoning a location for which the council hasn't got the infrastructure in place to accommodate the development that we envisaged when this matter was subject to a debate in the unitary plan. So, I feel, I hope that the officers who have written the report and have come up with the options analysis and the table of facilities can give me a good answer in relation to water, because at the moment I don't have an answer.
Andrew?
They don't have water in that area. We worked off the live zoning, and the live zoning will reflect the increment to land value that they've had. They're about 15 minutes from Papakura, but clearly their capacity to develop and the fact that they can't because water is not available at present, while it will affect their land value, it is one of the issues that you'd have to consider when deciding on the inclusion of that particular area, or when looking at the appropriate time to adjust the aspects of the boundary, because you'll note that our advice does talk about only being that land within the rural-urban boundary that is able to be developed as the main key, and so that then uses live zoned. Clearly, issues like this will be one of the things you could consider when you determine how you would word that part of the rating policy. So it may be live zoned and, for example, with another condition attached to it that could reflect issues of that nature where it's live zoned but can't be built because of lack of water.
Yeah, and
But noting that there will be individual properties throughout the urban rating area that are currently paying urban rates but can't be developed because of specific issues around infrastructure to those properties. And it becomes very hard until the full consenting process has gone through to actually know exactly what limitations are on properties.
I guess I'm foreshadowing, Chair, that when this matter comes back, we're going to have to address this, because it's not reasonable to say, oh, well, look, we want to provide you, we want to price you with the view to you taking up the incentive to capitalise your land, when in fact it's the council that, because we're not ready, they can't do it. We've live zoned a location, but we don't have the supply of water to all parts.
I suppose what I will say by way of, to back that up is, as you are drafting up the consultation material, please feel free to talk specifically to the councillors who will be very interested in this and that of their communities. Right? Member Taipri.
Can I have a point of order? Sorry, and I apologise to Member Taipri. I thought we had a mover and a seconder and we voted on this. Yeah. So we're not going to vote again, are we? I heard it was carried, so I'm just...
We're talking to the substantive motion?
But we already carried it. We put the vote and we carried it.
Okay, if you, I thought we were...
Confusing.
That's Councillor Watson asked a question, so that's fine. I'm happy with where it's going if you're happy. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Member Taipri.
Question may cause trouble, Madam Chair, after that. I do have a question, actually, and I'm sorry it's this late in the process, but it's just to meet some legislative requirements. Auckland Council Act requires Council to include Independent Māori Statutory Board in the design and execution of policy and plans. How was the Independent Māori Statutory Board involved in the preparation of this matter being brought to this meeting today?
We didn't provide any formal request for the Independent Māori Statutory Board to provide us with advice on this issue. We did informally speak with one of your staff members, though I know that doesn't meet that requirement.
So my concern is, because I've read the Māori impact statement, and it says some things, but it's not finite in my read of it. My concern is that it should have gone to the Independent Māori Statutory Board in order to meet the legislative requirements of the Auckland Council Act. And my concern is that it will go out without that being met, really. And I'm not trying to undermine what's been sought to get the views of the people, but it is important from my point of view, and I would hope for this whole council, to oblige the laws that are required of it, and that includes the part that says including the board in the design and execution of policy and plans of council. So the answer is that hasn't been done. I want that noted that it hasn't been done, because if this is approved to go out to consultation, that needs to be confirmed, because my concern is that it should have happened and Māori will have expected that to have happened. And I don't want it being confused that they thought it happened and it didn't.
Point taken. Andrew, all right? I think we will note that. Thank you and apologise for that. Councillor Walker and then Councillor Cashmore.
So just speaking to this, I referred earlier to the 3 tests that are in the agenda item. In my opinion, based on what I know about Whenuapai and Herald Island, I don't think they meet the tests. There are 2 additional tests that I think I'd apply here, and they were effectively referred to by Councillor Newman. One is around timing, and secondly, the other one is around funding. So I think if we are going to go out with something, we have to say to these communities that there's funding in the long-term plan for the unaddressed services like the sewage, the stormwater, the footpaths, the cycling, the community facilities or not. We need to indicate when those facilities will be in place, whether they are in this 10-year plan or not, certainly at least within the next 3 years, so that they know that. And if it's pretty clear, and it's the stated position of Watercare as it stands now, that they are not delivering water to this area, wastewater to this area anytime soon, and that Auckland Transport aren't providing a better public transport system, and we're not funding footpaths and so on and so forth, they need to know that. So what I'm saying to you, Madam Chair, is if we are going out with something of substance that people are going to make a commentary on and have a choice, that's need to know stuff, and I want to know that myself. Because as a ward councillor, and Councillor Watson is going to be in the same position, they are going to be asking that of us. And I'm not able to answer that right now, other than in the negative. Thank you.
So thank you, and I think your points have been noted, and if you reflect on what I said earlier, we're going to make sure that that is very clearly articulated in the documentation. Thank you. Final comment, Councillor Cashmore.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And I get exactly what the team's trying to do, is try and get a more accurate reflection on the rating, because there's some properties that would go into an urban rate. There are actually some that will come out of an urban rate currently and go into rural. So how we get that, as I said before, the refinement down. I think the welcoming part, Madam Chair, of what you said about getting those of us who have people involved in this process to actually have a look and help with the wording, because I think it's going to be absolutely critical. The criteria there, what is going to be included, and not in a slightly more succinct fashion than what's in these papers.
So I'd back that up, as I've said before. I think the devil is in the detail. I appreciate that you have done your work, both in the workshop and here, but yes, please, I will just reiterate again, please talk to the ward councillors about what the wording's going to be before you bring it to the rest of us, who may not be quite as familiar with those rural areas as others. Right, we've got the substantive motion now, moved by Councillor Fletcher and seconded by Councillor Cash. No, it wasn't Councillor Fletcher, was it? Was it yours, isn't yours? Sorry, Councillor. I don't know where that came from.
Madam Chair, I deliberately, because I don't. Didn't want to move.
Thought you had request. Oh, sorry. Sonia has said she's
It's fine now.
never mind, she's fine now. Right. So the substantive motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? No. Carried. And recorded against Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker.
And as Madam Chair.
And Sayers. And Stewart.